Your name on the far left?
Louisa. Sorry.
Louisa, nice to meet you. So I just had a question. It seemed like your exhibits were really focused on kids being quite close to them. And I think I remember, sorry, I'm right up here. So I think when I was at the Legion of Honor quite recently, I remember I was a little bit intimidated walking up to exhibits because there was people next to them, and just felt like I was kind of awkwardly standing behind them. So I had a possible suggestion. This could be something that you've addressed, but maybe possibly like a notepad or a pamphlet that has not even text on it, just visuals that maybe a child could read from afar, so they don't have to approach the exhibit with other kids around it. Because I remember that being a little intimidating if like it would be teeming with kids, when you're that one kid that doesn't want to come up to it and read it, and you're not confrontational.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one of the ways we're starting to do that is a program that we've launched in the Bronx where we have high school students we're training to give museum tours to further engage people. So there's physically someone standing there who you can talk to as well, who can help draw you in and explain some of the things that are happening. That's obviously at a much smaller scale than the total number of visitors that we encounter. But that's one way around that, is to build other programming to invite people in other ways. I personally am also a believer in making people uncomfortable in public space, like having to get close to other people is something you often don't have to do in public, and so that kind of builds its own interaction because of the discomfort.
Right on, awesome. That was a great answer. And also, I just wanted to say your exhibits looked awesome.
Thank you.
This question is also for you. So if you want to get back up there. Does your mobile pop-up museum have a guide to walk visitors through the exhibition, or do they just come to it as they find it?
The first one, the Wallace Museum, actually does have an audio guide associated with it that Ruby, who's our head of content here, spent a lot of time producing. And we have our website on the museum, so it says, connect to our audio guide, and it bumps you to our website, so you can pull that up and then you can listen to it as you view the museum. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And this is a question.
You can also view it on our site, even if you're not at the museum, so anyone here can go and listen to it at any time.
Oh, and I just want to say that the website for the museum is micromuseum.000.
Just the word micro.000.
Because there is another micromuseum.com, and it isn't that one. So this is a question for Maria. Can you speak to your process of marrying interactives and visual design with scholarship and education?
Okay.
Shall I repeat it?
Yeah, I think I get it. So, I do a lot of research, and I do research with other people. Probably like most of us in this room, right? You have to become kind of an instant expert in things and just do the deep dive in, you get very good at knowing what you need to know. I work with curators and education directors and scientists and so on and so forth, and so you develop a feel for what is going to what's right for what type of experience. And I think that's a lot of kind of like what Mark was saying about we don't ever do the same thing twice. I think that we don't do that twice, ever do that twice, but at the same time we also kind of develop muscles to be able to be very adaptive and improvisational. So I usually have to just kind of go through and work out, it's a balance between what does the scholarship say, what is the stuff here that is really important to the client, but then I also really ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm a human-centered designer, right? I think about the people, I think about what experiences they can have that are as rich as possible, and how, not just the visitor, but then how can I bring other people in the community or the institution into the project in some fashion. So that's very helpful in having that priority drives my process. So that's the filter through which I look at all research and data and every conversation that I have with curators or experts on a project that I work with. Does that answer the question? I hope so. Thank you, whoever asked that. Thank you.
Hi. I have one question for Louisa and then one for everybody. That's all right. So Louisa, I'm a museum educator, and I'd love to hear, how do you measure impact of these micro museums?
So we do a lot of visitor surveys in different ways. We do observations where we measure the time people spend with our museums and take note of what they look at and how they engage. And then we also do visitor questionnaires where we ask people specifically, what drew them in, why they visited, that type of thing. So we try and, as much as possible, collect data to do that, which is important for many reasons, including we exist on grants. And the people who are granting our museums want to know if what they're donating to is actually creating impact. So for example, with the Explorers program I mentioned earlier, we measured the difference between how long people stayed at the museum when there was or wasn't a tour guide present, and if it increased the number of visitors we saw over the course of a couple hours. And what we found was there were, it did increase the number of visitors, but not substantially, but the visitors who came stayed for much, much longer. So it obviously impacted them much deeper. I think it was 9 times as long was the average. So obviously those people were having a much deeper experience with the content than people without the explorers present. So yeah, we basically watch the museums from afar and count a lot.
And sorry, just on that real quick, are you able to count repeat visitors at all, or is it kind of impossible?
We haven't been able to do that. We do have a notes section in all of our, and so if the data collector happens to remember it, they'll write that down. But no, we count the visitors, the size of the groups, their approximate ages, and then how long they interacted and what they're looking at.
Very cool. Great, thank you. And then for everybody, I'm really fascinated by this kind of trend of Instagrammable museums happening right now, much to the chagrin of much of my colleagues. But I just find them fascinating, and they're obviously touching some kind of public need for them since they're so popular. I would just love to hear, what do you think about them? Are you ever inspired by them, just from a designer's perspective?
I could never get into the color factory. They're very popular. But I think the goal for all of us as designers is to create something that's compelling. And so you want those experiences at the museum to include things that make you and the visitor go, wow, that's super cool. And because we're now living in a more phone-centric society at the moment, people want to take pictures of themselves in memorable situations. So I think museums have always wanted to create memorable opportunities, and now knowing that the phone selfie or the photo of your family had something memorable, it's kind of always been there, and now it's just more like, well, people are going to want to do the thing. So for us, it complements something we might have done already. Most of the museums that we work on, their intention is to be more, have longer lasting engagement than just the selfie moments. But I don't look down on them because they're about those abbreviated moments, but they do seem a little thin on content. But people really enjoy them, and they draw on all of our collective work as experienced designers to try to make those experiences interesting. So I think we can all learn from each other. Well, what do we like about the color factory or the ice cream factory, and apply it to whatever we're doing next. So if people want to take their picture, that's a good thing. And people tell us, our clients say, make sure we have those moments where people can capture a memory of their experience.
Coming with some aplomb. I had a question for you, Mark, and feel free not to answer it if you don't want to. You can tell me in private afterwards. But I was wondering, given that you work with clients and do so much client-based work, how do you know when it's time to leave a project? Sorry to all the museum professionals in the room that might have to be left.
They leave me first.
Okay.
I'd say that's a good question because it's a hard question. I think we're fortunate in that when a project comes to us, the client has had a lot of opportunity to decide whether they really, really want what they want. They've been shown options. They've been given times to, to change things and learn about whether they can actually afford what they need or what they want and get their vision together. And much respect to exhibit designers, because some people just show up and say, I want this thing, and they don't really know what it is, and the designers have to work hard to kind of get them. Sometimes they come in with an idea and it turns into 5,000 ideas. It's like, you can't do 5,000 ideas, you got to pare it down to 500, and so by the time it gets to us, we've got a pretty good filter already before us. So I don't know if that would be a question suited more towards the designers per se, because that's, I think that's a much more upfront process. Regarding whether we've had clients who've kind of evaporated in the middle of the process, it's kind of rare. I don't know if we're lucky. So I'd have to think about that more. I'll just let it go with that. But thanks for asking.
Any more questions? Great. Thank you.
My question is also for Louisa, so sorry. I was just curious, your exhibits are, first, I think they're really cool and creative, and I love the idea of them. They're very tall, and I'm very short, and so are children, and I was curious how you deal with that and how you address that concern.
Well, one thing we do actually is we try and focus the exhibits at the bottom to be more child-centric, so the exhibits at the top tend to be more about adult subjects. The easiest thing to point to on this is the fact that at the very top of the Mollusk Museum we have an exhibit about how slugs have sex. So that's something that, if a parent wants to see it and talk to their child about it, that's great, but it's not right in the child's face. So we do choose where exhibits go based on the people who are most likely to see them. They top out at 6 feet tall, so even if you're short an adult, you can usually read the top. But we have iterated. On the Perpetual Motion Museum, we had to do some iteration on parts that we realized were hard to see actually when we got our full-size prototype into the field and realized certain things were trickier to read than others. So we try and be conscious of that. What we haven't addressed very well is people in wheelchairs who are obviously shorter but might still want that adult content, and so that's something we haven't figured out yet.
Actually, you could state my question for you too. I have a different question, but just to play on how difficult it is having an audience of all shapes and sizes. My first thought seeing that was, I can't see this small. I won't be able to get down on my knees and look at that. So yeah, it takes all sizes. I was just curious if you're going to have any plans on having any of the micro museums here in the Bay Area.
That is the goal, and we're actually talking to a few clients right now, so it might happen in the next couple months. But nothing's set in stone yet. But that's the goal, is to, Ruby and I are both based here. We work remotely with the team in New York, and so the goal is to have a museum out here in the near future. But right now they are all in New York.
Really?
And on our website you can see where they're installed, so you can always see where you can go and publicly see them.
Great.
Yeah. And to the different height things, just one more. The one thing I love is that those hero exhibits at the bottom are at kids' heights. So again, it's an indicator that it's for children as well, that it's not just for adults. And kids can peer into it really nicely, and adults have to sort of get down on their knees and be, again, a little uncomfortable in order to access that information that otherwise only children get to see.
Right, exactly. Well, I love the idea, and I really love the accessibility, because just here in the city working with the high schools, there's field trips to museums, but even still, when you get 100 kids and you say raise your hand if you've been to a museum, very few. So this is great. I really like it.
I think we have time for one more question. Okay, any more questions? Last call? Any burning questions? You're going to regret it if you go home without asking that question. Come on.
Okay, so I work for a tiny neighborhood history nonprofit, and we've been given this amazing opportunity, like this week, to do a pop-up exhibition and do maybe sky's the limit in a retail environment. So we're like swerving way out of our lane on this,
And I was wondering if you guys could give me some advice on what to prioritize, because our client has no idea what we do or what they want. They just have a lot of dead space they need to activate. So help me prioritize what to do here.
Great question. Thank you.
That's an awesome question. I think we'll all probably take a stab at that. My first thought is that make sure that you identify yourselves and what you need first before you kind of get into any sort of like, have real clear boundaries about that and decide what you want to get out of it. And sort of, they just whether it's true or not, just sort of take the position of like, okay, this space is here for us to serve our public and to serve our institution's needs, and kind of approach it in that way as politely as you may choose to do. But I think that is the first thing you're going to want to do in terms of your attitude or your position to it. And then I would really start to think about, like, you're going to need to, for sure, like, get some materials together. You will want to talk to any of the people here are capable of helping you figure out what those next steps are. I would say having some sort of a plan, a strategy and a plan, even if it's like short term, that kind of can align with whatever your current mission and vision are. It'll need to be interpreted for the for this site and this opportunity or problemtunity, whatever. Anyways. But I think that's sort of your first order of business, right? Is kind of to get that material together, and then also to think about like what you don't want to have happen to take kind of a moment to really get that information down for yourself. And I'm going to hand it off to Lisa or Rowan or Mark.
I'll get it on.
That's all really good advice in terms of working with a client. My first, the first thing that jumped into my head from a design perspective was who's going to see this. So think about who your user is and who's going to be in the store or walking by, and like what's going to motivate them to engage, and then start the design off of there.
Yeah, I would just throw out kind of a little, I don't know, maybe this is sage, but if you're starting here and they want this, maybe see if you can work with them to do something here first as a prototype, and use some of the stuff you've heard about evaluating and whatnot, putting it in one place before it turns into something overwhelming or too big for either one of you, and then you can learn about what you're doing together at that point. So that's my take on that.
So it makes me think about what are similar models for that type of experience, because a lot of times you build a museum, people come to the museum and they come purposefully to experience what you have. Lisa's got some projects that are more opportunistic, right, that people come across them in context. So it makes me think of, I fly around a lot for work and for pleasure when I can. I always enjoy the way that airports display artwork, and I always look at it because that's what I do and I like to see it. Some of it's very successful, some of it is not successful, in part because you have to understand that the people in the airport are on the move for the most part, and that how long you would spend there, how much energy and focus you have to spend there, and what is the audience who's in that context, what are their expectations, and what can you expect from them as well. So thinking of models that fit the context and how you might fit into that, that's what makes me think.
I just want to add one thing, and that I don't know what your museum is or what you do, but along the lines of sort of prototyping, you can also think about like working with an artist, right? Who might be someone who is comfortable working in the public space and in these unusual spaces as a way to kind of prototype or try things out and sort of see what people kind of gravitate towards a little bit, or what kind of works, and to approach it maybe, if it's possible, I don't know the context, but to then sort of approach it in a little bit more of a playful manner, or to see if you can carve out some space with this site or this group of people to be able to work in that way, so you can find yourself there, so to speak, and they with you, perhaps, but most importantly, that you do.
Put on a pot of coffee, we'll solve this right now.
Okay, well, that's it, folks. Thank you so much for coming. And if you want a quick tour with Mark, please hand to the side. Hopefully you filled in your evaluation forms and we'll collect them, or you can hand them in to Ariana, who's right at the back there. Thank you to our presenters. Can we just give them a really big... Thank you, everybody. Thank you, and good night. And I have no idea what's happening with the Warriors game, but hopefully it's good news.
We're going to win, right? How many of you are buying Toronto Raptors shirts tomorrow? Don't do it.